Sweetheart, I don't know how you ended up in this line, but first class isn't a field trip. You might want to double-check your ticket. Craig Whitfield said it loud enough for the entire boarding area to hear. Not a whisper, not a private comment. A statement, delivered with the flat confidence of a man who has spent 20 years deciding who belongs where and has never once been told he was wrong. The woman in front of him turned around slowly. She was 58 years old. Blue cardigan, pressed slacks, comfortable shoes. She was holding her boarding pass with both hands the way people hold things they have worked hard to get. Her name was Eleanor Marsh, and she had been a schoolteacher for 31 years, and she had saved for 2 years to buy this ticket, and she had not yet said a word to this man in her life. She looked at him, then at her boarding pass, then back at him. "I have a ticket," she said, quietly. "I'm sure you do," Craig said. He smiled the smile of a man who has already decided how this conversation goes. They print them for everyone these days. That's my whole point. The man standing directly in front of Eleanor turned around. His name was Keanu Reeves. Dark jacket, worn jeans, old boots, a backpack over one shoulder, and a worn paperback in his hand. He had the specific calm of someone who has been to enough airports to stop performing anything for any of them. He looked at Craig once, the way you look at a situation before deciding what it requires. Then he turned back to face the gate. Craig saw the jacket, the boots, the backpack. His eyes moved from Eleanor to Keanu and back to Eleanor with the expression of a man who has found more material than he expected. "You know what?" Craig said, turning to his colleague Gary beside him. "I genuinely cannot tell which one of them is the mistake." He laughed. Gary made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close enough to be useful. The gate agent called first-class boarding. Eleanor moved forward, her shoulders slightly drawn in. Keanu walked ahead of her. Craig followed, already on his phone. Nobody said anything, but the woman 2 spots behind Craig in the line watched Eleanor's face as she walked through the gate and thought about it for the rest of the day. The Los Angeles International Airport runs at full capacity the way it always does. Announcements in 3 languages, luggage carts weaving through the crowds. The organized chaos of a building that moves 40,000 people a day. In the first-class boarding line that Thursday morning, Eleanor Marsh had arrived 90 minutes early the way she always arrived everywhere. Carefully, quietly, with the specific preparation of someone who knows they are entering unfamiliar territory and intends to get everything right. She had taught 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary in Columbus, Ohio for 31 years. 3 decades of $30 supply budgets she supplemented from her own paycheck. Early mornings, late evenings, parent conferences that ran past 10 at night when a family was in crisis and needed someone to stay. She had a gift for the children who were slipping. The ones who came in wearing the same clothes 3 days in a row. The ones who fell asleep at their desks. The ones who acted out because acting out was the only language available to them for saying something was wrong at home. She had raised 2 children on a teacher's salary after her husband passed when Daniel was 11. Done the math every month for years. Never missed a mortgage payment. Put both children through college. Sat in every bleacher and auditorium and ceremony hall and cried the tears that come when something you worked toward for 20 years arrives and is finally real. Her retirement came at the end of May with a card and a small cake with blue frosting. She had driven home and sat in her kitchen for a long time afterward, which was unusual. She was not normally a person who sat. The ticket was her declaration. Her son Daniel was marrying a woman named Claire in a ceremony outside London. Eleanor had decided, for the first time in a very long time, to do something entirely for herself. Not practical, not modest, not the version of Eleanor that calculated the cost of everything against 4 other possible uses of the same money. She had set aside a portion of her pension every month for 2 years, protected it from a sensible voice in her head. When she finally confirmed the purchase on a Wednesday evening in February, sitting at her kitchen table in her bathrobe, she said out loud to no one, "Good." She told no one about the cabin class. She arrived at the gate 90 minutes early, found her seat, read the menu 3 times, said thank you to the flight attendant more than was strictly necessary. That was simply who she was. 31 years had made gratitude reflexive. Behind her in the boarding line, Craig Whitfield had been on a phone call about a deal in New York. Craig was 49, VP at a private equity firm in Chicago, and he flew first class the way some people breathe automatically without registering it, having done it so often that the experience had stopped meaning anything. He had the rolling confidence of a man who had been the most important person in most rooms for long enough that he had genuinely forgotten rooms could be organized any other way. He ended the call when the line slowed. Looked up, saw Eleanor. He saw the cardigan, the sensible shoes, the way she was holding her boarding pass with both hands. He turned to Gary. Sweetheart, I don't know how you ended up in this line, but first class isn't a field trip. You might want to double check your ticket. The seat assignment put Keanu Reeves in 3A by the window, Eleanor in 3B, Craig in 3C on the aisle. When Craig looked at his boarding pass and then at the two people already settling in, he stopped in the aisle for a moment with the expression of a man who has been handed a situation he finds personally insulting. He sat down, accepted champagne before the flight attendant finished offering it, looked at Eleanor as she carefully arranged her bag under the seat, adjusted her cardigan, opened the menu with both hands, and read it seriously. Okay, I have to ask, Craig said, to Eleanor, but not privately. How much of your annual salary is sitting in that seat right now? Eleanor looked up, set the menu down. I beg your pardon? Just a question, Craig said pleasantly. This cabin runs about $8,000 one way. For most people, that's a significant portion of their income. Teachers especially. He picked up his champagne glass. I'm just curious how the math works for someone in your situation. My situation? Eleanor repeated. Public school, right? Columbus, somewhere like that, I'm guessing. He looked at Gary. You can always tell. It's the shoes. Gary looked at the ceiling. Eleanor said nothing. She looked back at the menu with the controlled composure of someone applying 31 years of difficult parent conferences to a different kind of difficult person. Keanu had been reading. He lowered the book. He looked at Eleanor first, just long enough to see what the situation had done to her posture, the way she had made herself slightly smaller, the way her hands had moved back to her lap. Then he looked at Craig. Leave her alone, he said. Simple, direct, zero heat in it, which somehow made it land harder than heat would have. Craig turned his head slowly, looked at Keanu, at the boots, the jacket, the worn backpack in the overhead bin. Excuse me, Craig said. You heard me, Keanu said, and went back to his book. Craig stared at the side of his head. In 20 years of boardrooms and golf courses and first-class cabins, he could not recall the last time someone had said, "You heard me," to him, and then returned to a paperback without waiting to see what happened next. The complete indifference of it was more aggravating than any argument would have been. I don't know who you think you are, Craig said. Nobody important, Keanu said, still reading. Just someone asking you to leave her alone. Craig looked at Gary. Gary was looking at his phone with the focused intensity of a man who has decided not to be present for whatever comes next. What do you do? Craig said to Keanu, his voice carrying the specific tone of someone who has already decided the answer will confirm what he thinks. Keanu looked up. Films. Films. Craig let the words sit there. What kind of films? Like commercials? Corporate videos? Feature films, Keanu said. Craig's eyebrows went up. He looked at the boots, at the backpack. He smiled slowly, the smile of a man who has found the angle he was looking for. Feature films. In that outfit. He looked at Gary and gestured toward Keanu. Hollywood is really democratizing. I'll give them that. Craig, Gary said under his breath. I'm making conversation, Craig said. You're being rude, Eleanor said, quietly but clearly. Craig turned to her. I am sorry. You're being rude, she said again. To both of us. And I would appreciate it if you stopped. Craig looked at her for a moment. Then he laughed. Short, dismissive, the kind that says I have heard this kind of thing before and it has never worked. Sweetheart, I've been flying this route every month for 6 years. I know everyone in this cabin. I know what this cabin is. And I know what it isn't. He pointed between her and Keanu. And right now, what it isn't is the right place for either of you. Keanu set his book down, put it flat on the tray table, turned to Craig with the same expression he had maintained since the boarding gate, calm, unhurried, entirely awake. Say that again, he said. Craig blinked. Which part? Any of it, Keanu said. Pick the part you're most proud of and say it again. Something shifted in Craig's face. The pleasantness went out of it entirely. What was underneath was harder and colder and more honest. You want to do this? Fine. Let's do this. I run a private equity firm for billion under management. I've been in this cabin since before either of you could afford to think about it. I built something real, something that matters. And I am tired, genuinely tired, of sitting in these seats next to people who are here because they saved up long enough or hit some lucky break and think that makes them the same as the people who actually belong here. He looked at Eleanor. You're a retired school teacher. I respect that, genuinely. But this isn't your world. It's not. He looked at Keanu. And you, whoever you are, you're in a $200 jacket defending a woman you've never met because you think it makes you look good. That's not integrity. That's performance. The cabin had gone quiet, not the polite quiet of people trying not to listen. The real quiet of people who have stopped everything to hear what happens next. Keanu looked at Craig for a long moment. What she has, he said, is 31 years of children who learned to read because of her. Children who came to school scared and left feeling seen because of her. Children who are adults now who still think about her. He paused. What do you have that's worth more than that? Craig opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked around at the faces in the surrounding seats. None of them were offering him anything useful. A woman, too, rose back, had stopped pretending to read. A businessman across the aisle had put down his phone. Craig found his voice again. You know what I could do? One phone call. I know the chairman of this airline personally. I could have this row reassigned in 20 minutes. Okay, Keanu said. Craig stared at him. Okay. Yeah, Keanu said. If that's what you need to do, do it. Craig looked at the phone in his hand, then at Keanu, then at Eleanor, then back at Keanu. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. You think you're so much better than me, Craig said. His voice had changed again, something real finally coming through underneath the performance of it. Sitting there in that jacket like nothing matters, like you're above all of it. Let me tell you something. Everything in this cabin, the seat, the service, the champagne you're not drinking, somebody built that. Somebody worked for that. And it wasn't somebody in old boots reading a paperback. Maybe not, Keanu said. But the person who built it still had to die someday, same as everyone else. The silence that followed was the kind that comes when something has been said that nobody in the room has a response to. Craig sat back in his seat. He picked up his champagne glass, put it down, picked it up, put it down again, looked at the window, at his cufflinks, at Eleanor, who had turned back to her own window with the expression of a woman who has survived worse than this and will survive this too. The flight attendant, Madison, calm and warm, the specific steadiness of someone who has handled this kind of situation enough times to know when to intervene and when to let it breathe, came through with a mid-flight service. She poured Eleanor's wine first, the one Eleanor had pointed to earlier with an apology for not knowing how to pronounce it. Excellent choice, Madison said, and meant it precisely. Eleanor thanked her. The thank you of someone who has been through something and is still standing. Madison looked at Craig. Another champagne, Mr. Whitfield? Craig looked at his full glass. No, he said, quietly. Thank you. The Atlantic at night is a specific kind of nothing. The dark below the dark, the ocean beneath the clouds. Eleanor had her window shade partly open and was looking at it with the same careful attention she had brought to the menu, to the boarding pass, to everything about this trip she had prepared for so long. Keanu had closed his book. He had been asking her about Daniel's wedding, about the venue, about Claire, about how they met. Eleanor was telling him about the phone call 3 years ago, when Daniel's voice had something in it she hadn't heard before, something steady underneath the excitement, the particular quality of a person who has found the thing they were looking for and knows it. Craig had been listening for 30 minutes, not trying to, just unable to stop. He had also been looking at a photograph on his phone, coming back to it repeatedly. A boy at 18 in a cockpit simulator, wearing a jacket his mother had bought him specifically for the occasion, grinning in a way Craig had not seen in several years. Craig put the phone away. My son wants to be a pilot, he said. Both Keanu and Eleanor looked at him. Craig's voice was different from anything it had been since the boarding gate. The performance was gone. What was left was the sound of a man saying a true thing he hadn't planned to say out loud. 23 years old. He's been saying it since he was 8. I told him 3 months ago to be realistic. That passion isn't a financial strategy. He looked at the seat back in front of him. He hasn't called since. Nobody said anything. I have that photograph of him in the simulator. His mother arranged it for his birthday. He looked. Craig stopped. He looked like I used to look when I thought I knew exactly what I was doing and everything was still possible. He was quiet for a moment. I told his mother last month that his instructor said he was a natural, that he had never seen instincts like his in 15 years. She told me to call him and tell him. He paused. I haven't. Why not? Eleanor asked. Craig looked at her. For the first time all flight, he looked at her the way you look at someone you are actually speaking to. Because if I told him he was good, I'd have to stop telling him to be practical. And if I stopped telling him to be practical, he didn't finish. You'd have to admit you were wrong, Eleanor said. Craig looked at her. I've had parents sit across from me for 31 years, she said. Parents who knew their child needed something different, but couldn't admit it because admitting it meant admitting they had missed something. It always costs the child more than it costs the parent. She held his gaze. It always does. Craig said nothing. He looked at the window. Then the cockpit door opened. Several passengers glanced up. Madison straightened. Captain Donovan walked through, silver-haired, mid-50s, the particular bearing of someone who has been responsible for hundreds of lives for 30 years and wears that responsibility as a kind of permanent calm. He passed 4 rows and stopped at row 3. He bent slightly toward the window seat. Mr. Reeves, he said, clearly enough for the surrounding rows. The Flight Academy announcement came through this afternoon. I wanted you to hear it from me before we landed. He paused. Full funding confirmed. All 12 students. 3 years. Craig went completely still. How's the first cohort coming? Keanu said. 2 are licensed. 1 girl. She's 19. Starts commercial training in the spring. She's going to be exceptional. That's everything, Keanu said. Captain Donovan gave a brief nod to the cabin and returned to the cockpit. Craig was looking at Keanu with an expression that had moved through several things and arrived somewhere with no name in his normal vocabulary. 12 students, Craig said slowly. Flight Academy. Kids who couldn't get there on their own, Keanu said. Craig looked at the boots, the jacket, the backpack, the worn paperback on the tray table. The man who had sat for 2 hours while Craig told him he didn't belong here and hadn't once reached for his name or his reputation or any of the things available to him. You didn't say anything, Craig said. This whole time, you never. It wasn't the point, Keanu said. What is the point? Craig said. Keanu looked at Eleanor first, then back at Craig. She saved 2 years for this seat, he said. She taught school for 31 years. She came here for her son's wedding. That's who was sitting next to you. He paused. The point is that none of what you said to her was about her. It was about something going on inside you that she had nothing to do with. Craig was quiet for a long time. Your son wants to fly, Keanu said. Call him. Tell him what his instructor said. Let him fly. Craig put the phone on the tray table. His son at 18 in the simulator, wearing the jacket, grinning. He looked at it for the remaining hour of the flight. When the seatbelt sign came on for the descent into Heathrow, Craig Whitfield turned to Eleanor. Not to Keanu, to Eleanor. I owe you an apology, he said. Not because of who he is, because of what I said. I spoke to you in a way that had nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with who I've been allowing myself to be for a long time. He looked at her directly. You earned your seat on this plane. You earned every bit of it. I'm sorry. Eleanor looked at him for a moment, the same look she had used for 31 years with people who had finally arrived at the true thing after a long time of not saying it. I accept that, she said. She turned back to the window. The lights of London were spreading below, enormous and specific and real after all those months of imagining them. Craig sat with his son's photograph and the quiet that follows a decision that should have been made a long time ago. The wheels touched down at 6:41 in the morning. The sky was the specific gray of an English dawn, honest and quiet. Eleanor gathered her things with the unhurried dignity of someone who has decided this moment belongs to her. She stood. Craig stood in the aisle and let her go ahead of him. She moved into the aisle and walked toward the exit with the quiet certainty of a woman who had arrived somewhere she had saved for and earned and intended to be fully present for. Craig followed. found a corner of the Heathrow terminal away from the flow of passengers. Called his son. His son answered on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Craig said. "I'm in London. I just wanted to tell you something." He paused. "Your instructor from last spring, he told your mother you were a natural, that he hadn't seen instincts like yours in 15 years. He stopped. "I should have told you that the day she told me. I'm sorry I didn't." A long silence. "Dad," his son said. Something in his voice was different. "I want to hear about it," Craig said. "The flying. All of it. I'm not calling to talk you out of anything. I'm calling because I want to know." They talked for 43 minutes. Craig's phone dropped to 4%, and he found a charger, and they kept talking, and by the time they said goodbye, they had said things that should have been said 2 years ago. But the call happened. His son answered, and that is where it begins. Here is what is worth saying about Craig Whitfield. He was not a villain in the simple sense. He was something more common, and in some ways more worth looking at. A man who had been confirmed in his worst instincts by enough success that those instincts had stopped feeling like instincts and had started feeling like facts. A man who had learned that belonging somewhere was something you established by deciding who didn't. He was wrong. He was cruel to Eleanor, who deserved none of it. That is the truth, and nothing walks it back. But he called his son. He let Eleanor go ahead of him in the aisle. He said, "I'm sorry," without conditions or explanations. Those are small things. They are not the end of the work. They are the beginning of it. People underestimate teachers the way Craig underestimated Eleanor. Not because they're stupid, but because they measure value through the wrong instruments. Revenue, portfolio size, assets under management. The metrics that show up on spreadsheets and in year-end reviews. What Eleanor had built over 31 years did not show up on any spreadsheet. It showed up in a woman named Sandra, who is now 41 and ran a literacy program in Detroit because a fourth-grade teacher in Columbus had called her parents in October and told them their daughter needed to be tested for a reading difference that nobody had caught. Sandra still sent Eleanor a card every year on the anniversary of that phone call. Eleanor kept them all in a drawer in her kitchen. It showed up in a man named Marcus, who was now 38 and taught high school history in Phoenix, and had never forgotten the morning his fourth-grade teacher had come in early and sat with him for 40 minutes going over fractions because he had been too embarrassed to ask for help in front of the class. He didn't know she had been there since 6:30 because she had seen him struggling for 3 days and adjusted her whole morning around him. He just knew that after that day, fractions made sense. That is what Eleanor had built. 31 years of it. Quietly, without a portfolio or a board presentation or a plaque at an industry dinner. Craig Whitfield had $4 billion under management. Eleanor Marsh had that. Craig knew it. That was why it landed the way it did when Keanu said it. That was why he had no response. That was why he sat with his phone and his son's photograph and said nothing for the rest of the flight. He had spent so long measuring worth in one direction that he had genuinely forgotten there were other directions. What the flight gave him was not a new value system. Those don't install themselves in 5 hours at altitude. What it gave him was a crack in the one he had, just wide enough that a question could get through. He called his son from the Heathrow terminal at 6:52 in the morning. His son told him about a training flight over Lake Michigan in October, about the particular quality of light at altitude on a clear fall morning, about the feeling. His son paused trying to describe it, then said, "It's the feeling of being exactly where you're supposed to be. Like everything makes sense from up here." Craig listened without interrupting, without managing it toward a conclusion, without reaching for a practical objection. He just listened. It was harder than any deal he had ever closed. It was also the best 43 minutes he had spent in longer than he could calculate. When they finally said goodbye, his son said, "Same time next week?" Craig said yes. He meant it. That is not a transformation. Transformations don't happen in phone calls, but it is a beginning. And beginnings, when they're honest, are the only thing that actually matters. Eleanor Marsh watched her son Daniel marry Claire in a field outside London that turned gold at 4 in the afternoon. She sat in the front row and cried without reservation, without any of the careful composure she had maintained since the boarding gate. The best kind of crying The kind that means something good has arrived that you worked a long time toward. Daniel saw her from the altar and smiled. The smile of a son who knows what a day has cost his mother and is grateful she is there. When Claire's father asked about the flight, Eleanor said, "Best flight of my life." He laughed, assuming she meant a service. She meant the moment somewhere over the Atlantic when Keanu Reeves asked about her son and listened like it mattered, and she understood fully, finally, without apology, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not quietly, not apologetically, fully. That is the whole story. You save for 2 years. You buy the ticket. You sit in the seat. You take up the full space of what you have earned. And when someone tries to make you smaller, the person beside you reminds you that you were never small to begin with. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.